Declassified. 1943. The German ace couldn't hold back his laughter. Below him, the most terrifying weapon of the Second World War was struggling to climb. They called it a flying milk bottle. They mocked its shape, its weight, its speed. They had no idea they were looking at the instrument of their own destruction. This is the story of how arrogance turned to terror, how a weapon dismissed as an ungainly American joke became the unstoppable armored fist that destroyed the Luftwaffe's fighter arm and buried the Third Reich under an avalanche of steel and lead. The date was April 8, 1943. High above the scarred fields of Caen, France, the air was crystal clear and dangerously cold. At 27,000 feet, the pilots of Jagdgeschwader 26, the elite Abbeville boys, felt utterly superior. For years, they had owned this sky. They were veteran predators, honed by combat over Britain, Russia, and the Mediterranean. Among them was Oberleutnant Rolf Hermachen, an ace with the kind of confidence that only years of survival could grant. He peered through the canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. What he saw was baffling. Lumbering up toward his formation were massive, almost comical silhouettes. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. Hermachen, a man accustomed to the sleek, nimble lines of the Spitfire, couldn't suppress a grin that wrinkled his oxygen mask. He transmitted a brief, mocking message to his wingman. Die Amis haben uns fliegende Milchkannen geschickt. The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles. Below them, straining against the thin air, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group fought for altitude. Each machine was a behemoth, a 7-ton slab of American engineering, powered by the incredible 2,000 horsepower of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. To the German pilots, they were ridiculous. Barrel-shaped fuselages, almost pregnant in appearance, topped by massive canopies. The wings looked too small, the propellers too large. They looked like a freight train had grown wings and was attempting to defy gravity. They looked, frankly, like the wrong answer to a simple question. What makes a great fighter? The Germans pursued agility, speed, and climbing rate at medium altitudes. The Americans, under the genius of designer Alexander Kartveli, pursued something else entirely: mass, power, and overwhelming industrial-scale firepower. What Hermachen and his comrades didn't know, what none of the Luftwaffe, circling like confident wolves above, could have possibly grasped, was that these milk bottles carried the formula for the destruction of their entire air force. Loaded into those broad, thick wings was the heart of the coming terror. 8 half-inch Browning machine guns, a total of 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined synchronized rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute. Think about that for a moment. This concentration of firepower was enough to saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. It was a wall of lead. It was mechanical annihilation. And that morning, in April 1943, the first American pilots were strapping themselves into this locomotive. The man leading the 335th Fighter Squadron was Major Donald Blakesley, a veteran who had cut his teeth flying Spitfires with the RAF's Eagle Squadron. Blakesley knew what his new pilots were about to learn through sheer brutal necessity. Survival in the P-47 meant abandoning every piece of conventional dogfighting wisdom. The Thunderbolt was a radical declaration of American industrial philosophy. While German engineers chased incremental improvements in lightweight interceptors, Republic aviation created a high-altitude juggernaut, a dinosaur with a purpose. The genesis of the P-47 came during the Panic of 1940 as France fell. The U.S. Army Air Force urgently needed a high-altitude interceptor to match the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli delivered was a monstrous answer. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his design team. "But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone. At an empty weight of 9,900 pounds, it weighed 65% more than its closest predecessor. Its almost pregnant appearance came from the complex turbo supercharger system with massive ducting running back through the entire rear fuselage. The question universally asked by test pilots was simple. This thing actually flies? It didn't just fly, it conquered altitude. The 2,000-horsepower double wasp engine, boosted by the exhaust-driven turbo supercharger, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, an altitude where the superchargers of German fighters choked and gasped for air. The P-47 delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere, but the transition to war was brutal. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The early P-47 was a killer. It ground-looped savagely on landing. Its engine torques rolled violently on takeoff, and in high-speed dives, pilots discovered the terrifying phenomenon of compressibility, where shock waves formed on the wings and the controls simply froze. In those early months, the P-47 killed more Americans in training than the Germans would in its first months of combat. Yet, those who survived the training crucible discovered the aircraft's incredible potential. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would later become one of America's top aces, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 seemed to confirm every German prejudice. P-47s couldn't turn inside the nimble Focke-Wulf 190s. They couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109s at medium altitudes. They were sluggish and heavy. Luftwaffe pilots quickly exploited these weaknesses, forcing the Americans into turning fights, where the Thunderbolt's weight became a fatal liability. The commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, Hauptmann Josef "Pips" Priller, reported back to headquarters after his first clash. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. His boys quickly nicknamed them Indianer, fat targets pretending to be warriors. The statistics were damning. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. Even the RAF, veterans of the Battle of Britain, quietly suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. The British pilots joked that the P-47's best evasive maneuver was to unstrap and run around its roomy cockpit. But amidst the wreckage of those early losses, a strange, terrifying truth was beginning to emerge. A truth German intelligence completely failed to register. The Thunderbolts that went down had absorbed damage that defied all conventional understanding of aerial warfare. One P-47 returned from a May 4th mission riddled with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes. Damage that would have completely disintegrated a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt. The massive radial engine, unlike the liquid-cooled engines of the German fighters, lacked vulnerable coolant systems. It shrugged off hits that would have stopped a conventional fighter cold. The P-47 was over-engineered, over-armored, and built to survive. It was the anti-fragile fighter. Even more significant was what happened when the P-47s did get their guns on target. The German pilots, used to the lighter punch of rifle-caliber machine guns or the limited ammunition of cannons, had never experienced the devastation delivered by 8 synchronized, heavy half-inch Brownings. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergence zone of total destruction. It was not a burst of fire. It was a solid stream of steel. The event that irrevocably changed German perception and cemented the Thunderbolt's legend occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lazo, France. It involved the same Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47 un-flyable 8 P-47s, returning from escort duty, was bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from the Secue JG-26, led by a highly skilled pilot. The Germans executed a perfect dive from the sun attack. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the vulnerable rear of the formation, was instantly caught in a catastrophic crossfire. In the first seconds of combat, 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. His canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid blinded the cockpit. His engine cowling was ripped away, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded by shrapnel in the leg and nose, tried desperately to bail out, but he was trapped. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was alone, trapped inside a dying, burning aircraft at 27,000 feet. What followed was a demonstration of structural engineering and sheer willpower that defied every assumption about combat damage. Johnson somehow managed to level the aircraft and point it towards the distant safety of England. The P-47 continued to fly, shaking violently, with controls that responded only intermittently. But the nightmare was far from over. It was about to get much, much worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by a pilot whose identity has been lost to history, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping home at a barely flying 170 miles per hour. The German pilot positioned himself behind the flying wreck and opened fire, unloading his 4 20mm cannons and his heavy machine guns into the P-47. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the German's entire cannon ammunition load. Then the German repositioned, now firing only his remaining machine guns. Still, the P-47 flew. The German pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the wreck. Johnson clearly saw his opponent's face. Young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion, and then to something approaching fear. The German pilot made one last pass, emptying his remaining machine gun ammunition into the P-47. Then he pulled alongside again, shook his head in absolute amazement, gave a final informal salute of shock, and peeled away, out of ammunition, unable to comprehend the sight. Johnson's P-47 crash-landed at Manston. The crew chief eventually gave up counting the bullet holes after reaching 200. One 20mm shell had detonated against the armor plate directly behind Johnson's seat. The main structural backbone of the fuselage, the longerons, were shot through. Control cables were partially severed, yet the aircraft had brought him home. The wreckage of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers were stunned. They had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence flatly refused to believe the combat reports. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment and survive. But the testimony of the German pilot confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the best Luftwaffe fighter could deliver and laughed it off. By July 1943, American pilots, led by Colonel Zemke, were learning the P-47's secret. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The massive weight, once a liability, became the Thunderbolt's ultimate weapon. In a dive, nothing could touch it. From 30,000 feet, the P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter, even in a vertical dive. That speed could then be converted back into altitude in a devastating zoom climb that left any pursuing fighter helpless and far behind. Captain Walker, Bud Mahurin, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic. Instead of traditional dogfights, P-47 formations climbed to extreme altitude, higher than German fighters could operate effectively. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts rolled inverted and dove, a hammer from heaven. At the bottom of that terrifying dive, the heavy machine guns spoke, creating what surviving German pilots described as facing a wall of lead. Aircraft caught in that convergence zone didn't just fall, they disintegrated. Wings separated from the fuselage, tails were severed, crew compartments shredded into metal confetti. The true revelation of American power came on August 17, 1943, during the deep penetration raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. It was here that Major David Schilling, leading his squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Me-110 destroyers, the specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. The date was August 17, 1943. It was the deepest penetration. Raid into Germany attempted to that date, and it was about to reveal the true meaning of American firepower. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, saw the enemy formation below. Messerschmitt Me-110 destroyers. These twin-engine aircraft, heavily armed with cannon and rockets, were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. They were less maneuverable but packed a devastating punch. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled inverted and plunged toward the Me-110s from 28,000 feet. The speed was immense, the German targets growing rapidly in the gun sights. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Me-110s, survived the encounter and later recounted his horror in an interrogation. The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. Roth's voice, filtered through the transcript, conveyed genuine shock. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage, the crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In less than 60 seconds, 8 Me-110s were destroyed. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated, ballistic destruction. Each P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of half-inch ammunition. At the optimal convergence distance, usually set to 300 yards, all 8 guns' paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything caught in that zone was hit by over 100 projectiles per second. The metal literally could not withstand the sheer volume of high-velocity steel tearing through it. The aircraft didn't crash. They were erased. The ammunition itself was a revelation of American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited 20mm cannon rounds, typically 120 to 200 total, American pilots could maintain continuous fire for over half a minute. The standard combat load mixed armor-piercing incendiary, armor-piercing tracer, and ball ammunition. It was a cocktail of destruction designed not only to puncture, but to ignite the internal structure. The incendiary compound burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to turn aluminum into molten slag. Lieutenant Colonel Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe, summarized the effect clinically. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. The revelation of altitude, the Achilles heel of the Luftwaffe. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality about the P-47 that extended beyond its guns. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude, precisely where German fighters suffered. The Thunderbolt's turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German fighters, relying on less efficient mechanical superchargers, saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet. They were flying into a region of air where their engines gasped, and their control surfaces went sluggish. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this new reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation over Bremen at 28,000 feet, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. He was a veteran of 500 combat missions on 2 fronts, a tactical genius. But against the American machine, brilliance was irrelevant. P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet. The German fighters were, quite literally, sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to ace status after his famous survival, spotted Philip's distinctive Focke-Wulf. Johnson's combat report was devastatingly simple. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philip's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe High Command. If one of their absolute best, a man who had survived everything from Stalingrad to the Battle of Britain, could be obliterated by the flying milk bottle, what chance did average pilots have? Reich Marshal Hermann Göring ordered an immediate panicked investigation into the P-47's true capabilities. The report, delivered in November 1943, was sobering. The Thunderbolt service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its speed in a dive approached the sound barrier. Its armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot and a thick, half-inch bulletproof glass windscreen. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would have destroyed 3 conventional fighters and still return home. The propeller of doom. The final insult. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that completed the transformation from laughingstock to outright nightmare. The P-47 D-22 featured a new Hamilton Standard hydromatic propeller with massive broad-chord paddle blades 13 feet in diameter. These were like massive oars biting into the air. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The tips of those huge blades, reaching supersonic speeds, created a distinctive, deep, thundering roar that could be heard for miles. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They stopped calling it a milk bottle. They began calling it Dona-schlag, Thunderclap. Hauptmann Heinrich Knoke, a veteran of over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variant in February 1944 near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We tried to disengage, but they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." By March 1944, the P-47, once dubbed short-legged, could escort bombers deep into Germany. With external fuel tanks, 2 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank, the Thunderbolt's range extended to over 1,000 miles. When the tanks were dropped, the paddle blades ensured the fighter was immediately ready for combat on equal terms. The Luftwaffe's strategy, to concentrate on the bombers and ignore the escort, collapsed. They were forced to fly through the P-47 screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. Grudging respect quickly bordered on outright fear. Major Gunther Roll, one of Germany's greatest aces with 275 victories, survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. He recalled the moment of realization. "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death." The juggernaut shifts focus. The rise of the Jabo. As the longer-ranged P-51 Mustangs began to assume long-range escort duties in the spring of 1944, P-47 units shifted their primary focus. They became dedicated ground attack aircraft, a role that would make them the most feared, most devastating weapon in the German arsenal. This transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery, designed for aerial combat, proved equally effective against ground targets. The armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles. A 2-second burst, just a quick squeeze of the trigger, put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of external ordnance that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry a bomb load equal to early war medium bombers, 2 1,000-pound bombs under the wings, and a 500-pounder under the fuselage. Later variants added rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect was devastating. German soldiers called them Jabos, Jagdbombers, fighter bombers. But these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Luftwaffe discovered how utterly the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were simply massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported a chilling observation. The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned German fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically strangled German movement in daylight. The statistics are staggering, a chilling testament to industrial warfare. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, and 512 tanks and armored vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the threat. They reinforced vehicle armor. They deployed more anti-aircraft guns. They developed new camouflage. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the dreaded 88-meter flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving armored fighters at low altitude. The Pacific Theater and the Jet Challenge. While dominating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its worth in the vast, harsh conditions of the Pacific. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, found the Thunderbolt's rugged durability perfectly suited to the long distances and extreme heat. Colonel Neil Kierby, commanding the 348th, led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak on October 11, 1943, shooting down 6 enemy planes himself in a single mission. He won the Medal of Honor. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who faced the P-47s, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away." The P-47's shift to the ground attack role, while devastating, did not mean the end of its air-to-air career. In fact, it was about to face the ultimate challenge, the arrival of the German jet fighter. The Messerschmitt Me-262, with a blistering top speed of 540 miles per hour, should have been untouchable by any propeller-driven fighter. The jet represented a technical superiority that Germany hoped would reverse the tide of the air war. But the Thunderbolt pilots had learned the jet's secret weaknesses. Me-262s were most vulnerable in 2 situations: during takeoff and landing, when they were slow and fuel-hungry, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group achieved the impossible. Diving his P-47 from 28,000 feet, his Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. The German pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving piston engine fighter until Meyer's 8 guns opened up at 400 yards. Meyer's combat report noted, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of 850 caliber guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft." The heavy machine gun, once dismissed as outdated, was actually a perfect counter to the fragile aluminum structure of the early jets. One good sustained burst tore them apart like paper. By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were deployed specifically to counter the German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting the double Wasp engine to an incredible 2,800 horsepower, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized the new P-47 philosophy. The jets are faster, but they can't turn, and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery, and they come apart like they're made of paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them. The final lesson: industrial logic versus tactical brilliance. The ultimate, brutal demonstration of American material superiority came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate last-ditch attempt to destroy Allied air power on the ground. On January 1, 1945, nearly 900 German fighters, including their best remaining pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. The goal was simple: cripple the planes and buy the Wehrmacht time during the Battle of the Bulge. At Waiboy 34 Airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack was initially a success. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured German pilot was brought to the command post and, seeing the burning wrecks, taunted the Americans. What do you think of that? Major George Brooking's response became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line where ground crews were already pushing the damaged aircraft aside and preparing the hard stands. By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots? The German pilot's smirk vanished. That quote summarized the entire course of the air war. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47D-40s were filling the flight line, flown in from depots in England. The Luftwaffe, in their desperate gamble, lost 271 aircraft and 213 irreplaceable veteran pilots, instructors, squadron leaders, the very core of their remaining fighting force. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all attacked airfields, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. The Germans were fighting a battle of attrition they could never win. They had superior tactics, but the Americans had superior capacity. The industrial juggernaut Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At its peak, the factory on Long Island completed 1 Thunderbolt every hour, around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built from empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D was a machine of incredible complexity. 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual components, machined to tolerances of 1,000th of an inch. Yet, American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with a precision that exceeded peacetime standards. This was the true, terrifying weapon the Germans faced. The sheer scale of the ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The fuel consumption alone was enormous. The 9th Air Force consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly by late 1944, all of it shipped across the Atlantic in tankers that were themselves products of American mass production. Even more decisive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with less than 100 hours total time by the war's end. The difference in the cockpit was insurmountable. American pilots arrived trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding their enemy's limitations. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, summed up the advantage. I had 420 hours in my logbook. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, studied gun camera film from actual combat. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight. The laughter dies. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Josef Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials seeking to boost morale. His statement, deemed too demoralizing for publication, revealed the complete transformation in German attitudes. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. But beyond the machine is what it represents: unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20, we lose 1, it's gone forever. Priller's words were the ultimate surrender to industrial reality. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. The final confrontation was no longer tactical. It was psychological. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed almost entirely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. But even if aircraft and fuel had been available, German pilots faced an impossible equation. Attacking meant facing P-47 formations that owned every altitude, from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded. The wings separated. I barely escaped. Brettschneider's testimony captured the final truth. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire staff. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The psychological impact was complete. German medical officers began documenting what they called Jabo fever, physical symptoms of stress appearing in pilots and ground troops whenever the Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced hurricanes and Spitfires without fear became physically ill before missions against the P-47s. The distinctive, deep thunder of approaching Thunderbolts, the Dona-schlag, caused immediate panic among ground troops who knew that survival meant finding cover instantly. The final judgment: .50 caliber versus cannon. Even after the war, some German veterans maintained that the P-47 won solely through quantity, not quality. They argued that German fighters were technically superior, but were simply overwhelmed by numbers. The combat records, however, tell a different, more nuanced story. In engagements where numbers were equal, the P-47s consistently prevailed, specifically because of its armament. The heavy machine gun battery, once dismissed as inferior to the 20mm cannon, proved demonstrably more effective in actual combat against the fragile structure of World War II fighters. Analysis of gun camera footage revealed the critical difference. German cannon shells, while individually more destructive, required extremely precise aim and had severely limited ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds total. A pilot had to be perfect. The P-47's 8 Browning machine guns created a statistical probability cloud of bullets that guaranteed hits even with imperfect aim. At typical engagement ranges, a 2-second burst put at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, enough to ensure catastrophic destruction. The ammunition itself was superior. American .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary API rounds used a delayed action fuse that ensured penetration before the incendiary compound ignited. This compound burned at temperatures hot enough to melt aluminum structure. German 20mm shells often exploded on surface contact, causing spectacular but often superficial damage. The P-47, at its heart, represented the perfect merging of overwhelming industrial resources with brute force engineering philosophy. The design was famously overbuilt. The wing spars were designed to support 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount could withstand 12 Judrid forces. Control cables were doubled throughout with automatic backup systems. The ammunition feed system alone was a marvel of engineering. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each holding 425 rounds, fed through electric boost motors to prevent jamming during high-G maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude. It was a complex, beautiful, and utterly ruthless machine, built by the thousands, flown by kids barely out of high school, and maintained by mechanics who learned their trade in weeks. The system was designed to be invincible, and it was. The Pacific, and the long-range terror. While the European theater often overshadows it, the Pacific was where the P-47 proved its long-range evolution. The P-47N variant, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity with wet wings holding 93 gallons each. This innovation extended its range to an astonishing 2,350 miles. The short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon, escorting B-29 Superfortress bombers all the way to Japan. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, having faced the Thunderbolt, noted the lack of effect his 20mm cannon had. "I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away." The P-47's legendary durability was a universal truth of the war. The historical record: laughter to annihilation. The captured German intelligence records at the end of the war revealed the complete reversal of opinion about the American fighter. April 1943, assessment: large, unmaneuverable fighter, inferior to German types in all performance parameters except dive speed. Machine gun armament insufficient. Assessment: minimal threat. December 1943, assessment: exceptional high-altitude performance. Extreme structural strength. Firepower increasingly problematic. Assessment: significant threat, above 25,000 feet. June 1944. Assessment: dominant fighter-bomber, superior to all German types, above 20,000 feet. Firepower devastating against all target types. Structural strength makes shoot-down extremely difficult. Assessment: Critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945. Assessment. Best fighter bomber of the war. Combination of firepower, durability, and performance unmatched. Pilot quality exceptional. Assessment. Unsurvivable in direct engagement. The transformation from minimal threat to unsurvivable took less than 24 months. It is one of the most drastic, rapid shifts in aerial combat history. The final statistics of the apocalypse. The final statistics of P-47 operations defy comprehension and deliver the final, brutal judgment on the air war. In the European theater, 3T-752, German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. 315. 15-2. Aircraft destroyed on the ground. 86,000 railway cars. Destroyed. 1,000 locomotives. Destroyed. 1,000 armored fighting vehicles. Destroyed. 8,000 trucks destroyed. The 9th Air Force alone, primarily equipped with Thunderbolts, flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, and fired 135 million rounds of ammunition. The Thunderbolt units achieved a staggering 4.6.1 kill ratio in aerial combat, while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. It was efficient, devastating, and inescapable. The human cost was paid by the enemy. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against the Western Allies. Many fell to the concentrated, unforgiving fire of those American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of training and experience that Germany could never replace. By war's end, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. The last word. At a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Arizona in 1985, General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, gave the final word on the P-47. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat. We said they built a bomber and called it a fighter." Galland paused, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "We were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one designed around production, firepower, and survivability. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor." He concluded with the ultimate tribute to the American industrial victory. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. They built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns. We called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. The laughter died with the German comrades who were consumed by that avalanche of steel and lead. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. Call to action. But the story doesn't end there. The Thunderbolt changed the face of war, but it also paved the way for the jet age it briefly defeated. What do you think was the single most impressive P-47 statistic? Was it the 4.6-to-1 kill ratio, the 135 million rounds fired, or the fact that one aircraft could be built every hour? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more of the incredible untold stories that turned the tide of World War II, hit that like button and subscribe right now. We unearth hidden views and bury the competition here every week. Don't miss the next classified history deep dive.